Okay, good afternoon again. My name is Kayla Reed. I am the chair of the Reparations Commission. This is our fifth public meeting, so I'd like to welcome you to that. And we're going to go ahead and get started with our meeting today. So I'm just going to go over the agenda and then we'll get into the programming. So today we're going to review the mandate and the executive order that convenes the commission. We're going to have some open remarks from commission members just about the past few meetings, our ongoing thinking about the report that we are mandated to produce by next March. We're going to have a presentation on historical violence and inequality in St. Louis. We're going to have questions from commission members and then questions and public comments from you all. And then we're going to review our fall schedule and then we're going to close out. So that's what we're going to do today. So I'll start with I'll start with the review of the mandate and executive order from Delisha.
Good afternoon. My name is Delisha George. I serve as the secretary for the commission. The commission was established by the mayor of St. Louis, Tashara Jones, and signed on December 7th of 2022. The executive order reads in part, the Reparations Commission's mandate shall be to explore the history of race-based harms in the city, reveal the present-day manifestations of that history, and ultimately propose a method and potential funding resources for directly repairing the harms that have been inflicted. The commission shall explore not just the socioeconomic and political evidence, but also engage the moral, legal, and historical evidence for various claims to reparations and redistributive justice. Thank you.
Okay, and now we'll have open comments from the commission members, just any reflections on the past few meetings and hopes for today's meeting. We'll start on this end and work our way down.
Thank you all for being here. I'm sorry, I hope you all hear me. Thank you all for being here and for your support and your contributions as well to the work that we are doing.
Hello, my name is Kim Franks, and I just want to echo that expression of gratitude with the weather. The weather's not calling us to be outside today, but thank you for demonstrating how important this work is by coming out and joining us in this nice corner of the city, in spite of all that's going on outside.
Hey guys, my name is Jada Brooks. Thank you for being here. I'm excited about this Reparations Commission, and I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say, and I'm excited to listen and receive. And yes, I think we're going to have a good presentation today, and so, yeah, thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Will Foster. I just want to echo everyone else. Thank you all for showing up in these weather conditions. I'm excited for our presentation, and I'm also excited to hear what else you all have to share with us.
Hi all, I'm David Cunningham. I'll now echo everyone's echo, which is mostly to express gratitude here for being here today. We know it's far from an ideal day in terms of the weather, coming off this terrible heat wave that we've had throughout the week, and our location isn't necessarily easy for everyone to get to depending on where you are in the city, so it's really nice to see you here. I'll be speaking with you for a little bit longer than usual for the presentation in a few minutes, so I'll leave that be, but I'll also just express gratitude through our past meetings for you all sharing so many of your ideas, but also your experiences, and I think that that's one thing that's really coming through in our planning meetings, is that when we read the mandate, there's the word evidence is there a bunch of times, and you could see evidence as data that we can draw on and numbers and things like that, but we're very clear that your experiences and what that has meant for the issues that we're dealing with today are really primary to our process as we go forward. So we also just really appreciate how much of yourselves you're bringing here and sharing in terms of experience.
Thank you. I'm Reverend Kevin D. Anthony, and just want to also say thank you for being present. The meetings, from my view, have been phenomenal. Appreciate the work that the commission has put forward so far. As you know, or might imagine, this is a tall task or assignment that has been given to us. But we ask that you continue to support the work, be present, because your presence and what you have to say and your input are all critical to this ongoing process. And so it is important that we hear from you and see you here in these forums. And so thank you again for being here, and we continue to look forward to serving the St. Louis community as we seek to discover what reparations should look like for those of you who reside here in this particular city. Thank you.
Good afternoon again. I'm very grateful for everyone's attendance today. I think the commission is really wrestling with how do we continue to create space where we're learning together, asking those questions out loud as we prepare to start to generate the report. And so each meeting for the last 3 meetings have had presentations that really focus on key themes that the commission members are wanting to explore. And so I'm excited about today's conversation and looking forward to your comments and questions about this topic or any topic. And as we are now entering the fall, so it is our mandate that we are going to begin to shape the outline of the report and start to bring in key experts to begin to write the sections of the report, and do that in a way that is both transparent and participatory, so that by next year we have a report that the attendees of these meetings, and some of you have been at each one, so it's good to see you again, feel proud of and ready to present to the mayor and this administration around next steps for reparations. So thank you again for coming today.
Good afternoon. Again, thank you for being here. I'm Dr. Will Ross. I'm the vice chair of the commission. I was running a little late because I was leaving a place of healing and truth and evidence called a hospital, and I came here to a place of evidence and truth and healing. This library, we've been very bold, we've been very factual, and you have been very passionate about explaining what you desire from the community. And so here I am promoting healing here. Thank you.
Good afternoon again. My name is Gwen Moore. I just want to say that, you know, your voices are critically important. We always take copious notes. And I think this has been more than a learning experience to find out what people really want, what people think. And a lot of people have been doing this for quite some time. So I'm always humbled at all of these meetings. So thank you.
Great, thank you to the commission members for those opening remarks. We're going to move toward our presentation today. So our first 3, what we've had the ability and privilege to provide is the first 3 presentations from commission members, so that this body is full of experts on different topics. And so our first presentation was by Gwen Moore on wealth and inequality inside St. Louis. Our second was from Dr. Ross about public health and inequality. And today we're going to talk about historical violence and inequality in St. Louis. And our presenter today is Professor David Cunningham. So I'll quickly read his bio and then pass it to him. So David Cunningham is a professor and chair of sociology at Washington University in St. Louis. His research focused on racial contention, and his legacies has been supported by numerous foundations. Professor Cunningham's past work centers on the Ku Klux Klan, in particular the complex roles the KKK played in various communities throughout the 1960s and its enduring impacts on contemporary voting patterns and crime rates. His book, Klansville, USA, The Rise and Fall of Civil Rights Era, has been featured on NPR's Fresh Air, CBS News, and the Miller Center Forum, and in a PBS American Experience documentary film. The rest of his bio can be read at sociology.woostu.edu. But I will pass it to Professor Cunningham on the presentation. It's long. That's why I was trying. I didn't want to read the whole. It's a long thing. Okay. So but today's topic is historical violence and inequality, and I'll pass it to Professor Cunningham.
Thanks so much, Kayla. And again, I feel appreciative, and I'll echo Commissioner Moore here, just also feel really humbled to be able to talk to you. You know, again, we really feel like most of the value of what we get out of these meetings is from hearing from you, but I really do appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the work that I've done and do, and how it might intersect with some of our aims here today and throughout this whole year as we work through this Reparations Commission process. And, you know, I think Kayla did a really nice job just situating where we are. So with these presentations, we've heard from Commissioners Moore and Ross, and they've really talked about important issues that largely have centered on how particular policies in the history of St. Louis have led to and made worse entrenched inequalities in the city. And so we can think of this long history of policies of displacement, policies of segregation, policies of disinvestment that have advantaged a small group in the city and have really targeted large swaths of the population, and particularly the Black community, of course. And next month, when we have our next meeting, we're going to have our first presentation from an outside expert, and this will be the historian Walter Johnson. And many of you may be familiar with Dr. Johnson's book, The Broken Heart of America, which is squarely about St. Louis, and really focuses on describing St. Louis's history as defined by violence in a number of ways. And this is violence that benefits those who have held power in the city for decades, and it disproportionately targets St. Louis's Black population. And so what I'm hoping to do today is to try to bridge our emphasis on policy and an emphasis on violence. And what I really want to emphasize here is that these broader histories of violence themselves, when they're left unaddressed, continue to worsen the inequality that we experience today. So we can think of this as a legacy of violence itself. And of course, that sort of violence impacts the people who are directly targeted by that violence. It impacts their families, it impacts their neighborhoods and communities, but it also has this broader effect on everyone who is present in a particular space that's beset by violence, and violence around which there tends to be, in a lot of places, and I think St. Louis is certainly one of those, a lot of silence around it. There isn't acknowledgement by people who perpetrated these kinds of things. And so what I really want to focus on is a large body of research that shows how damaging those histories are, especially when they're left unaddressed. And just to be clear, when I talk about violence, I'm not referring primarily to interpersonal violence or to crime in a place like St. Louis. What I'm focused on is violence that's targeted as political action. And we can see a long history of this in St. Louis. And just to take a few really important examples, we can see this reflected in the lynching of Francis McIntosh in 1836 in downtown St. Louis, the lynching of John Buckner in 1894 in the county in Valley Park. We can certainly see this in the East St. Louis race massacre in 1917. We can see this in mob action targeting Black youth who were trying to swim in a newly integrated pool in Fairgrounds Park in 1949. We can see this in the steady and continuous history of police violence, violence perpetrated by police in St. Louis. I should have said it at the outset, there's just a few handouts here that aren't crucial here, but they're over on the table. Some of you may have them, and if you do, they're the second page of the handout that I'll talk about in more detail later as time allows, but focuses on documented police violence across 60 years in St. Louis. And so this won't surprise many people in the room, but we can see how this is patterned. We can also see that as Black communities have been mobile in terms of the neighborhoods that they've lived in over the last 60, 70, 80 years, we see that police violence is following that mobility, and the pattern is following where the predominant locations of Black communities in St. Louis. So this long history of targeted political violence is really what I want to focus on. And again, what I want to emphasize, and this is the first page of the handout that you see, is that there is a large body of social science research that shows that this history of violence, again, when left unaddressed, helps to explain the continuation and the worsening of inequality in a whole variety of ways today. This is everything from income inequality across racial groups. This explains political polarization, the degree of political polarization, the degree to which we see neighborhoods that remain segregated. The incidence of hate crimes in places are highly related to the perpetration of this historical violence. A study by my colleague and collaborator at WashU, Jeff Ward, who's in African American Studies there, has shown that when we look in the South, those histories of violence, where it occurred most pronouncedly, are much more likely today to have higher incidence of corporal punishment, physical punishment against students in public schools in those places. So we see this continuation and perpetuation of violence and inequality rooted in this long history. And so what I do want to focus on today first is that relationship, that when we see violence in the past, it is not unrelated to the inequalities that we see today, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And that's the other side of the story, and the more hopeful side of the story is that there is a related body of research that shows that in communities that are beset by this sort of historical violence, that take measures to address, meaning identify, give voice to, and seek to repair those histories, we see the relationship between those histories and inequality today reduce. So it actually improves the current standing and the current level of inequality in a community. So that is both a more hopeful story, and I think one that is clearly related to our mission here today. And it really shows, certainly reparations is one means of addressing these histories. So giving voice to these kinds of histories, acknowledging them, but also seeking repair, really recognizing that this is something that does need to be repaired. And so, what I hope we can focus on here is both the relationship that I'm talking about today between history and inequality today, but this hopeful other side of that history, which is like the power of the kind of process that we have here today and your presence in the room today. And I'll say something else that's not surprising and is also the underside of what we're doing here today, is that what I'm saying is acknowledged by folks who are not at all invested in reducing inequality in St. Louis and may be invested in perpetuating and deepening inequality in St. Louis. And we know this because that whenever we see these moments of repair, this effort to seek these kinds of whether it be reparations or other modes of acknowledgement, we also see resistance, we see backlash to this. And I will say, first of all, we see this very broadly in a broad effort to think about curricula, to roll back the ability to teach Black history, to teach histories of violence that are referred to as quote unquote divisive, so they shouldn't be taught to kids. And so we see that broad effort. And I'll also say, and this will relate to the third page of the handout here, this is really reflected in ongoing efforts to bring this history further to light in St. Louis. And I just want to quickly tell a story of two reparative efforts that are ongoing here in our region. And both of these efforts work from the Equal Justice Initiative, and I hope some of you have heard of the EJI. They're based in Montgomery, Alabama. There's a national memorial to peace and justice that focuses on the country's long and pervasive history of lynching. But one of the things that EJI also does is create a framework for what they call their community remembrance projects. And so they hand out here, I'll just read this because it's short. It says that the community remembrance projects collaborates with communities to memorialize documented victims of racialized violence and fosters meaningful dialogue about race and justice. So these are programs that are organized in Montgomery, but are supposed to spread out to the 800 counties around the country that have been beset by documented racialized violence in this way. And so St. Louis, there's a group formed in reaction to the EJI's efforts called the Reparative Justice Coalition of St. Louis, so RJCSTL, that has sought to work with the EJI to document the first two acts of violence that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. So this would be the killing of Francis McIntosh, which is in downtown St. Louis, and John Buckner in Valley Park 60 years later. And just to talk about those two efforts, the way that the EJI's community remembrance projects work is they begin with a soil collection to acknowledge that this is ground and land upon which this violence occurred. And so for every site of these acts of violence, there are jars of soil that they collect. They send one to Montgomery for the museum, and two are kept here locally. And following the soil collection, there is the placement of a historical marker. And that acknowledges the specific act and its significance. And that is designed to lead to a whole set of community-based programs to foster dialogue and repair around this. And so I'll say already in St. Louis, and some of you may have attended or been part of this in some way, the soil collections for both of these sites, which is downtown, it was in the northwest corner of Keener Plaza, was the site of McIntosh's killing, and then right by the Merrimack River out in the county in Valley Park, there were soil collections in both of those places and ceremonies around those. And I will say, as that's proceeded, now moving to the historical marker phase, the city of St. Louis has given strong and consistent support for this sort of initiative. So if you see the photo, these aren't wonderful photos, they were taken from my phone, so I'll apologize, but the left-hand photo at the bottom where the sun is behind the old courthouse there, Mayor Jones is speaking in that photo, although it's hard to see. So we had representation by our city's leaders at this ceremony, and there is a clearance to move forward to place the historical marker in the northwest corner of Keener Plaza. But if we go to the Valley Park side, I'll give you the current status of this right now. Valley Park officials have now questioned whether the particular act of lynching actually occurred in Valley Park, and they're insisting that they think it occurred on the other side of the Merrimack River, and they refuse to allow a marker to be placed with that. And of course, the RJC has plenty of evidence for exactly where this act occurred, which was in Valley Park, north of the river. And since they have reached out to say, we have specific evidence for this, we can alleviate any concerns you have about the fact that we're doing something without evidence, they have absolutely refused to provide a response to that. And so the story, I think, is important in itself because it's something that needs to be addressed in itself. But also it's emblematic of what I'm referring to here, the difference between a violent history that can be addressed, identified, given voice, and repaired, and a violent history where silence is maintained through the efforts of elites, of people who are in the leadership of these communities that refuse to allow voice to be given to these kinds of histories. And I think we know that St. Louis can be a divided place and when we think about the city and the region, and we see that very clearly in these two very different reactions here to the EJI's community remembrance efforts. And so I just want to say that in part to note that we do have, and just to reiterate, a large body of research that shows the continuing negative effects of not addressing these histories, and also to acknowledge, again, the importance of being here with you all to do exactly the opposite, to really work in a process that's designed to address this and to give a means of repair. And as we consider this too, of course, reparations are largely about material compensation, material means of addressing these sorts of issues. And so much of what we talk about here will rightly discuss things like that. But I also want to make sure we continue, or at least have in our collective head here, the importance alongside those material means of repair, the importance of providing a basis for everyone to know these histories and why they matter. And this gives voice as well to why it is that reparations in all of its forms are really crucial to the work that we do. So I just wanted to make sure that we can highlight that aspects of things as we talk about much more concrete material issues that need to be addressed. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Cunningham. We are going to start with just any questions or comments from the commission, and then we'll open it up to the audience. And we'll start on this side, if that's okay.
Yeah, I do have a question, especially as it relates to the officials in Valley Park, because this is not unusual to see the powers that be turning a blind eye to the realities of history is happening on the state level, on the national level, with the attack on teaching Black history, the attack on LGBTQIA issues. So how do you move forward? First of all, what's going on with Valley Park? And can we learn anything from Valley Park that we can apply to, like, our state officials or our officials on the national level in dealing with these issues?
I mean, it's a good question, and this, I think, is, you're exactly right, of course, that this is an unusual, we're also in a moment where I think people, certainly on the RJC side, are kind of on their heels in a way that even a year ago they might not have been. I mean, the movement to, strip away the teaching of Black history, to strip away anything that looks like it's related to diversity, equity, and inclusion in schools, in the name of, quote unquote, protecting kids. And you think about, like, who's being protected. I mean, it's almost too obvious to have to spell that out in terms of who they think they're protecting from hearing these kinds of histories, and who isn't protected when we don't tell these histories. And so, but it does, I mean, the question you're asking is so crucial, like, how do we move forward? I mean, I think the idea now, and what it's always been, is to be as rigorous as possible about the evidence for these kinds of claims, like to push back, because they're trying to push back on evidence grounds, which is basically saying there's a lack of evidence that this act happened here, and we don't want this placed here if there's any uncertainty about that. And there isn't any uncertainty about it. So the idea of, like, using evidence to push back would be a predominant strategy, but it does speak to this idea of now, what happens, I mean, another thing that we know that the powers that be can do is just sort of refuse to meet, refuse to continue discussions, and that becomes really difficult. I mean, what I'm hoping, and one of the secondary reasons why I wanted to tell that story is, I think, giving broad awareness to the story. I don't know how many of you knew this prior to me saying it today, but this isn't something that's ending up, to date at least, on the front page of the Post-Dispatch. It's not on the evening news. It's not being covered right now on NPR in this way. And it does seem that really giving voice to these stories in a way that really calls out the sorts of officials who are just denying this solid evidence that really defies what it is that they're saying seems quite important. But I will say I feel a little less certain that evidence-based work is the solution or the only effective solution than I would have even a year ago today, just because there's so many efforts to just, like, deny even talking about evidence these days.
David, I visited the Equal Justice Institute, and it was quite moving, I would agree. And it was very visible depiction of that politicized injustice. Putting monuments is really great, but putting facts in the heads of particularly our young people is even better. Yeah. And we've certainly seen an attack against that type of progressive education. So in terms of really memorializing that history you just gave and what we're doing here in St. Louis in our schools, particularly, even starting with our elementary schools, and what's going on with the History Museum. How effective are we in presenting this history to those young people who really need to know this and hear this?
I mean, I would say, and I can defer certainly to Gwen and others here around museums. I'll just call out, and I'm sure a lot of you know this, powerful exhibits like the #1 in Civil Rights exhibit that Gwen curated and organized is, tremendously effective of, giving rise to not just a narrative, but really putting so much resonant material in front of people to let them know, especially young people, to let them know about the generations that preceded them and that kind of work. And so I feel like museums, in some ways, seem to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but seem to be protected in ways that schools are vulnerable today. Public schools are directly under the purview of boards of education, of city and municipal officials, and not to say that museums don't have to face those pressures, but the way in which parents, white parents, I'll say, are organizing around parents' rights and things, it seems that schools are much more in the crosshairs of that than, say, museum spaces and things. And I'll also note, one of the things that the EJI does push alongside soil collection historical markers, the next thing that they ask communities to do, and it's being initiated this fall in St. Louis, is to sponsor an essay contest from young people to talk about this history. And in some ways, this provides incentive. It's something where there are prizes around the essays. There are resources to recognize students who do this hard work. But also it's designed to provide another channel for people, especially young people, to get involved in this history and learning more about it that isn't solely what's happening within schools. And so I think things like that are important too.
Thank you for that. My question is around the second slide, the documented police shootings of St. Louis residents. And you mentioned in your presentation that when we think about the legacy of violence, we think about individual people, their families, communities, and there's silence in response to that, often from state. Can you just speak on the impact of police shootings and incarceration on communities and the legacy of that and how we see it today? I'm especially interested in the concentration that even once you start to see Black families move south, you start to see the increase in police shootings in South City. Yeah. And the continued police shootings in North City. And just to speak that in the last week, St. Louis City had a police shooting in North City where they shot a young Black man. And St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department remains one of the largest police departments per capita for a region of our size, and also one of the most murderous police departments in the country.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And this is such an important aspect of what we're talking about. And I'll say, first of all, I want to credit Ashley Jackson, who has been a graduate student at the Brown School for Social Policy and Social Work at WashU, who created these maps. And I will say the website, the link here, I know it's tricky because it's a long link and it's just on paper here, but if you go to that website, each of these dots here, and I think this is really important, actually then leads you to the story of the individual victim of violence. And so, one of the dangers of these kinds of maps is to even implicitly be saying we're reducing these terrible acts to just dots on a map and patterns. And so there are individual stories behind all of these if you go to the website here. But a couple of the aspects that you highlighted, Kayla, are really important. One is this changing pattern from left to the right, which is, the idea of where we see a migration of Black families and households to different parts of the city. We see violence following that there. And underlying that, what's really important, I think, is that while you are right that St. Louis has one of the largest police forces and the most violent police forces in the country, there is not a straightforward relationship between crime rates and police violence rates. And that's really important to highlight because I think there's a line of explanation around this, not my line, but there is a line where people say, well, we see violence where we see more crime and we're going to see more violence occurring because there's more police action in those areas. And if you look more broadly nationally, one of the things that's quite clear is that the degree to which police forces are violent and where they're violent is not a direct product or correlation with where you see the most crime. And so I want to separate those out to start with. And then the other thing I'll just say is, while we see individuals are being victimized through each of these acts, and I think it's clear for anyone who's been proximate near any of these acts in any sorts of ways, I mean, the effects here are very pronounced, obviously, and this is true of incarceration as well, on families as a whole. We know this. Obviously, where someone being incarcerated as an individual, this will have profound effects on their overall family, and on caregiving across generations with children who no longer may have a parent at home, at generations above and below. And, again, I don't think you need a long line of social science research citations to understand this, obviously. But I will say there is a much a growing both awareness and documentation of these broad family effects of both incarceration and victimization of violence by the state and by the police. And of course, these have broad effects in neighborhoods as well. I mean, when you see these clusters of repeated violence occurring in neighborhoods, it becomes impossible to be in, say, a public school in St. Louis and not be around people whose families have been directly impacted by these kinds of things, to live in a neighborhood where your neighbors haven't been directly impacted by these kinds of things. And so while these maps show dots that are related to individuals and particular locations, certainly we should think of these things as really spreading out and having this broad community effect. And this is part of this line of historical violence that continues to deepen inequalities across neighborhoods and inequalities by income and all sorts of things. It's not just about issues that relate directly to policing. So it's really a broad effect here.
You said something earlier about the violence following the concentration of Black communities, and I'm kind of like panning back and forth and maybe seeing a pattern where it seems like from the first set to the second set, that there are areas where there was a concentration of police violence, and those neighborhoods there's been a reduction in Black population. Can you speak to that? Are you seeing some type of effect, maybe like this is preceding gentrification, maybe Black families are fleeing the police violence?
Yeah, I mean, so that's an important question. I think we see a mix of things happening. And one, and I think you're bringing up exactly what's important, is the after effects of violence and how that can relate to subsequent moves out of areas. So that's one of the things that definitely we can see is migration away from areas like this after these kinds of acts occur. I'll also say, overall, what I was saying about violence following the presence of Black families and households is going to be true, meaning, I didn't want to put in like the statistical correlations, et cetera, but certainly if you do take this and actually try to relate this, you do see a significant relationship in where Black communities are located and the likelihood of violence. It's not going to be a perfect sort of relationship. I think Kayla mentioned the South Side here, which is maybe the clearest place that we see this, an area where there were not a large number of Black families in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but are now. You see, violence by many degrees increasing in that way as committed by the police. The other thing I'll say is that these are the locations of where these acts of police violence occurred, which is not the same. It's often related to, but not the same of where the people who are victimized by this live. And the reason I'm going to call this out is that there are a couple of clusters here you'll see that look like, it's a little hard to see on this map, but that are around the fringes of, say, the Central West End and other areas that we know both have private policing and higher levels of security. And we can see acts occurring in areas that are victimizing Black residents of the city, but in areas that don't look like they're predominantly occupied by Black families and communities. And part of that is, as we know, the kind of underside of policing, which is the degree to which we see the protection of certain neighborhoods and the likelihood of violence being committed to protect certain neighborhoods at the expense of others. And so I think that creates some of the sort of slippage here in terms of the pattern too.
You mentioned something about the material side of things when talking about this topic. Could you like clarify what you mean by that, or like expand more on that?
Yeah, so thank you. And I realize I was not very clear here, but I know both from the kinds of comments that people have rightly brought here and looking at reparations initiatives around the country and around the world, you know, one of the main goals in many reparations processes are to shrink, you know, what I was referring to kind of vaguely as like material inequalities between groups, which are largely around wealth, around income gaps, but especially wealth. And we know this, that, you know, we can find income differences that are structured by race, but when we look at wealth, which is like all of what people possess that gets passed down intergenerationally from parents to kids, et cetera, that is where we see huge gulfs of inequality in terms of the access that some families have to wealth. And we have very clear reasons why that's the case. It's related to disinvestment in particular places, the inability to purchase homes in areas where those homes have drastically increased in value, and so the families that live there now have that wealth to pass down, and if you were denied that opportunity to live in those spaces and purchase property, you don't have that wealth accumulating over time. And so we understand that there are specific policies that have led to this. So the idea of material reparations would be to enact measures that are going to reduce the wealth gap between Black communities and other communities. And so people, you know, certainly have come to these meetings, talked about cash payments, talked about the ways in which you can provide opportunities for people who do not have the capital, meaning like the wealth passed down through their families, to be able to invest in particular things. And so you know, what I didn't want to do today is talk about memory and history and monuments, let's say, or historical markers, and have it sound like I was intending that as a replacement for addressing very, you know, stark material inequalities around wealth and things like that. And so I wanted to really frame this as a both-and conversation. Like we should be talking about both of these things, and it's not one replacing the other or a reason to not give, say, cash payments because we're going to put historical markers up or something like that. So I wanted to emphasize like material and symbolic together.
We go. Thank you for the questions from the commission. We are now going to open up for public comment. There is a microphone in the audience finally. It's been a few meetings, we know, but there is a microphone in the audience. And so if you have public comments, I'm going to pass it to Rev to give you the rules around that, as always, but we're going to open it up for that.
Thank you, Kayla. Certainly we have come to the moment in the gathering where we will hear from you. Here are the things that we ask you to follow as you prepare to come. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to share with the commission. We ask that everyone please respect that, because we want to make sure that we provide room for all who desire to have comments. As you come, we ask that you state your name, your neighborhood, and any organization affiliation before providing your public comment. Note that when you come to the end of your comment, or if you have stretched it past the 3 minutes, you will see my little red piece of paper here, meaning stop. As we've been taught in grade school, this red sign says stop. So we ask that you take note of that. The commission will be recording any questions from the public, but we're not here to provide answers on how you will obtain reparations. We're still, again, working through preparing our work for the city government. And there will be additional opportunities for public comments with the commission. Written comments can be submitted on the city website. So you are welcome to come at this time. The mic is here. We ask that you look this way, address the commission with your comments. You may come at this time.
Hello, my name is Shakita Hill. I grew up in North St. Louis, but I stay on the south side now. And my question was, say you don't know your family history, are you all doing anything around that so that people will know, you know, their ancestors or their history, so that if they wanted to, you know, see what reparations meant for them, you know, they could find out that information? Will that be on the website? And I'm also with Action St. Louis, so I've been looking at you guys from TV, and I'm like, cool, right around the corner. So I just thought that was a question I wanted to ask in person. How would you know? You know, would it be through the archives or something like that?
So we don't have a process for individual sort of family history research, nor has the commission taken a formal position on ancestry as it relates to reparations. And so that's something that the commission is still figuring out over the next few months together.
Okay. Well, that could have been just a suggestion. Because like I said, I'm pretty sure someone else probably had that question also. Thank you.
And I think, Kayla, she may have also asked, will the information be public for them? Certainly, it will be. Yeah. Thank you. Next.
When I first heard that there was going to be a commission on this topic, I really got excited, and then I looked for it on the city website. It was not there. Called the mayor's office probably 7 times trying to find it. They couldn't find it. I couldn't find it. And I just really wanted to make sure we all know that is unacceptable. Today's meeting is not on the city calendar. That is unacceptable. People have been talking about reparations for over 50 years. In 2015, over 100 people, the smartest black people in the world, got together without the government's position and talked about reparations. And they've come up with the ideas of the best way to get started on trying to fix the mess that's going on. It's on the internet for anybody to go to. I assume that the mayor and this committee had that information, but if not, it's the National African American Reparations Commission. Most of the work on what to do has already been done. We just got to find somebody with the guts to find the money and fix this. You can't repair it. That's impossible. So I really call it damages for the crimes that have been committed. When I looked on reasons to do reparations, also online was reasons Europeans say reparations shouldn't be supported. And what you have to remember that the people that still continue to oppress us today are the great, great, great grandchildren of the people that enslaved Africans. So they know what they're doing. And they receive the benefit of unearned white privilege every day. So they can't say it wasn't me. They can't say that. And as long as they've been talking about it, how about since the first African got off a boat and was brought here? That's how long the reparations have been due, and yet nothing. But they found some money for Ukraine, right? Real quick, real quick. They spend $47 billion a year in other countries. That's a crime right there. If we receive reparations, it's going to be a whole lot of Europeans furious. Too bad. I'm furious every day when I go out and see the condition of our community and hear about it on the news. You should be furious. We come up and we elegantly talk about this. No, we should be furious. You got to think about what happened to some people. I'd like to discuss this a little further with you. I want you to know I hurt for you. I hurt for you to have to do what you do every day to deal with this. So anybody can contact me, and let's bring 5 more people with us next time we come.
Yeah, I heard him a little tall. All right. How y'all doing today? Michael Gregory. I hail from Ferguson, Missouri. I live in the 13th Ward. I'm the owner of ConsciousOutloudMedia.com, Voice of Black Americans. Thank you all for having these. I've grown and learned from each one of y'all presentations, and I appreciate that. And thank you for the, when you were talking with the mayor, thank you for letting me know that you appreciate what I've been bringing. So I got a statement, and this statement is going to be based around what Mr. Beeks talked about. The arguments against reparations played a destructive role in shaping discussions around reparations for various groups, including Japanese Americans. These arguments did not prevent reparations from being paid to Japanese Americans and should not prevent reparations for Black Americans. Some of the arguments against reparations for Japanese Americans are as follows: historical distance and individual responsibility. Similar arguments were made against reparations for Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II. Critics argued that the internment occurred decades ago and current generations should not be held responsible for the actions of the past. However, despite these arguments, the U.S. government eventually acknowledged the injustice and took steps to provide direct cash compensation. Practicality and budgetary concerns. These arguments were also present in discussions about reparations for Japanese Americans. The process of identifying and compensating individuals who were affected by internment was complex and required significant resources. Nevertheless, the government established the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which provided a formal apology and, more importantly, monetary reparations to surviving Japanese American internees or their descendants. Cultural divisions and unintended consequences. These arguments were considered in the context of Japanese American reparations as well. Some critics worried that providing reparations might create division or resentment among different ethnic groups. However, the Japanese American reparation process aimed to acknowledge the specific historical injustice and promote healing rather than division. Legal and political challenges. Overcoming legal and political challenges was a significant aspect of implementing reparations for Japanese Americans. Advocates and supporters of reparations had to work to build a consensus, navigate legislative processes, and address oppositions in order to pass the legislation that eventually led to reparations. The fact that the nation of Japan at the time was one of the world's economic superpowers can no account be overlooked. Where is the international pressure for justice for Black Americans? Shift in focus and ineffectiveness. Some argue that the reparations might not effectively address the root causes of internment related injustices. However, the reparations for Japanese Americans were seen as a way to acknowledge the violation of their civil rights and to provide a measure of justice and closure. And I want to add to the syllabus that you are going to have going on with the I want to add Dr. Claude Anderson's books, Powernomics, Black Labor, White Wealth, A Black History Reader, Dirty Little Secrets About Black History, More Little Dirty Little Secrets About Black History. And I'll conclude with the 60th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's March on Washington, previous to that, we're coming to get our check. At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they can mechanize their farm. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the Black man he ought to lift himself up by his own bootstraps. This is what we are faced with today, and this is the reality. Now we come to Washington in this campaign. We are coming to get our check. Thank you.
Are there others?
I just want to follow up on that. I'm Faith Sandler. I live in Skinker de Bolivar, which is the 10th ward now. And I'm the director of the Scholarship Foundation of St. Louis. And I spoke at the first hearing just to encourage that we not forget institutions and private philanthropy and its relationship to public policy and to some, in fact, of the violence on this very map perpetrated in previously Black communities like the one I live in. So if you just look at where Washington University is, and then look east of there through the entire northern section of Forest Park in the first map, and then in the second, you can see the influence of the university's development of real estate, use of eminent domain and blighting, and the change in policing patterns and the death and policing of the people who live in those communities. Further, look at where St. Louis University is located and you'll see some similar changes in this very map. And so the issue of private policing is critically important in these neighborhoods because the private police forces don't even have the accountability that our murderous St. Louis Police Department has for the numbers and for the actions that they've taken in the communities that they're policing. So I just want to, we're sitting in a building funded by Andrew Carnegie when it was built. There is a very dangerous connection between public-private money and these continued patterns of abuse and violence that we cannot ignore in talking about who's going to pay reparations to whom. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Vivian Gibson.
I'm a retired St. Louis Public School employee, Big Brothers Big Sisters employee. I'm currently enjoying the position of being an author. I wrote a book called The Last Children of Mill Creek. And I was, in fact, with Ms. Moore here, one of the last children to live in a practically erased community. I'd like to follow up on what Ms. Sandler said. I think it was Sandler. I apologize. When we talk about institutions and public and private money, St. Louis University sits on clearly half of the footprint of Mill Creek Valley. The institution of St. Louis University has never even acknowledged that. Part of that neighborhood or that community was the first gravesite of Dred Scott. There used to be a cemetery at Laclede and Grand. It was a community that was populated primarily of Black people moving in the Great Migration from the South, poor people, working class people, but it was a viable community that was the pattern for what Washington University is doing today. It's exactly the same thing. Probably in slow motion, Mill Creek was like a bomb. Boom, 1 year it was gone. It was like a bomb in that there was nothing there. They didn't even have a plan. It was like, let's get this out, let's put a half-mile strip of a highway along the railroad tracks, but we'll take another 450 acres and just think about what we want to do with it because it's a valuable piece of real estate. Black people are here. Before 1959, Black people were limited to where they could live. So we were segregated there, and we created communities there. We created a culture. And then the city decided they wanted that land that they had relegated us to. They built Pruitt-Igoe housing project, thought, oh, we'll just shift them over there, when in fact, only maybe a third of the people from Mill Creek went to Peabody, well, they probably went to Peabody too, but to Pruitt-Igoe. So I say all of that to say that there's a history that we can look at of disinvestment and displacement that is right here for us to see in the recent past. However, that past was just on the verge of being totally forgotten. And just to talk a little bit about monuments and their roles, I'm working with a committee called the Mill Creek Commemoration Committee, and we're working on putting markers, historical markers around the perimeter of that footprint of Mill Creek so that students could have a form of reference. We'll put QR codes on them so they can click on them and find more detailed information. So that's a step for the next generations to come, to at least have knowledge of what was before them and what we're asking to be repaired. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's not safe.
Hello. I did not mean to make it fall. My name is Dallas Adams. I am a Dutchtown neighbor right next door in the 3rd Ward. And I also serve on the Dutchtown Main Streets Board, so I'm very involved in our community, activating events and trying to bring the community together. And one thing that I would like to see the Reparations Committee consider in their planning is that sometimes what people think about on the institutional level is what's going to be helpful for all may not always trickle down into the needs of what each community is. And sometimes when it comes to grander ideas and bigger funding and trying to figure out how to parse out those pieces of money, there are pockets, I feel like, of the city who are prioritized over others. I mean, we can see it in the disparity of all of our communities. And so that's just one thing to consider. And then also thinking about material reparations versus symbolic reparations. one of my biggest concerns in my community is that we will have these material reparations that people will not be able to fully grasp or leverage to their best benefit because of the historic, spiritual, mental, physical violence that has been enacted upon Black people over time, that there is a gap in how to manage wealth and how to manage coming into a power structure that's kind of flipping on its head and giving people a platform to be elevated and to choose for themselves. And so I'd like to see the Reparations Committee also consider how we can invite mental health professionals, how we can invite spiritual leaders, how we can invite people to the table that as people come into these material reparations, they are able to adequately leverage them to be able to have wealth that is passed down instead of wealth that is used to solve the kind of fight or flight survival situations that a lot of the members of our community, especially in Dutchtown, it is one of the most populous and poorest and blackest neighborhoods in the city of St. Louis. And as much as I want my community to come into that, I want them to be able to also be able to leverage it and use it as a step up instead of just a Band-Aid over the many issues that they have to solve right now to just be secure and stable and safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, distinguished panel. Professor Cunningham, I caught your presentation on the ride-in. Thank you again, and I'm going to get that book that she introduced. I'm an avid reader, and thank you all. And what I wanted to speak about specifically, the wealth conversation. Unfortunately, what people don't understand about wealth is transferred and then it's not earned. And Black wealth in America there wasn't any because of slavery. And for the most part, we speak about, first of all, we need to understand that that money is still in the economy. It never just poofed out the way. And again, wealth is transferred, and reparations is the inheritance that was denied our ancestors. And secondly, I don't have too much to add. I just want to personally thank you guys. We've been keeping up, but I do want you to know that as you go in and you explore, you need to know that John Connors enacted this in '89, and he did have quote unquote lobbyists, and that organization was NCOBRA and NARC. Those were the lobbyists since '89 up in DC, the National African American Reparations Commission. Yeah, they've been lobbyists since '89 along with NCOBRA. We have a lot of legacy organizations that are in this space. And again, this is a wealth conversation. And that's all I have. Y'all have a great day, and thank you.
Thank you.
We want to thank everyone who provided public comment today. We're going to end the meeting with just closing comments from the commission and then information about our next meeting. And so we'll start from this side, since I started from this side with the questions.
Thank you all again for coming out, and also thank you for the information that you share with us. So please don't assume that we know everything and we have all the resources already. We are taking note of things that are mentioned as well. And as I believe Kayla mentioned earlier on our website, that's open for comment, but also you can send information there too to get to us. And so this is you see us up here, but this is a collaborative effort. So it's not just us working on this, and so we do appreciate your help as well, and thank you for coming out.
Yes, thank you, everyone, for coming out and for all the comments. I was taking a lot of notes, and so I really appreciate the references, the case for reparations. You can go law school. And so it's given me, and I'm sure my fellow commissioners, lots of food for thought. So, and so I just also want to make the appeal, which is next time, bring 5 friends with you.
I want to thank everybody for their comments and let everybody know that I empathize for all that was said, and I feel strongly about everything that was said. And I just want everybody to continue to be strong, Lord, because that's what we know how to do. As Black folks, we know how to be strong. And so just thank you. And we're going to get justice, y'all. We are going to get justice because the Lord is on our side. Amen. Amen.
Again, just want to thank everyone for showing up. It was nice to see new faces as well as returning faces. I've taken inventory of everything everyone has to say. I appreciate the recommendations, and thank you, Professor Cunningham, for the great presentation.
Just another note of appreciation for y'all being here today, and I, like DeLachey and others have said, I feel like at every meeting, speaking for myself, learn a lot from you, both in terms of the perspectives that you share, but also the kind of history and experience that you've had. I mean, you mentioned things and initiatives and organizations and all these kinds of things that we're not necessarily evenly aware of, and so you're definitely bringing that newly every month. I think that list gets longer, as well as the experiences that you all have and how that matters for our process. So just thanks once again.
I too reiterate the thanks for your presence here today, but I also want to add that at each meeting, I'm amazed at the freshness of the information that comes forth. It's been phenomenal just to hear different voices, people who have gone through the struggle and have a passion around this. And I want to assure you that your passion is ours. And we share where you feel, and we're going to dig in deep to do the best that we possibly can to bring some healing to this moment. I especially want to say thanks to Mr. Beeks, this young Sandler, Ms. Sandler, and Ms. Gibson for your information today. I thought that was tremendously powerful. And so I extend my thanks to the 3 of you for the information that you shared today. Thanks to all of you for being here.
I also would just like to say thanks. I take notes every meeting. We transcribe every conversation. This is not just important to me as an individual commission, it's important to Action St. Louis, who's in the room today. So please, we are doing the work in lieu of it not being on the city's website. We are phone banking, we are sending texts, we are sending emails. So please sign in so that we can keep in touch with you, because we are really trying to stand in the gap to ensure that this conversation is robust. You provided a book list. If you could just give me that piece of paper, that would be helpful, because you blew through it. You know, it was quick. I know you only got 3 minutes. But we are trying to put together a syllabus for public education and learning, the same information that we've gone through together and are still figuring out. Also just want to say that this commission has not put together its recommendations yet, but feel very clear that our recommendations are going to be what has been reflected in these meetings, and feel very clear that we have to address the wealth inequality that is present inside of our communities. And it's Black August, right, which is significant, and my origin into movement work and justice work is actually the murder of Mike Brown in 2014. And so every August, we are reflecting that this isn't a past conversation, that we don't have to look back to 1836, right? We have present accountings of the violence that happens in our communities and the way that that incites both pain and promise to address the inequality so that we don't continue to lose our children to these systems and that we are able to actually build a world and a society and a city specifically that provides opportunities for them. So I just want to thank you all for continuing to come out. It's our 5th meeting. We are in it now, you know, like I feel like we're family. I look forward to seeing y'all every month. But I'm really grateful for this conversation. And Professor Cunningham, I call him Professor Cunningham because he was my professor. I majored in sociology at WashU. But the presentation about the legacy of violence and trauma and how that lives in our bodies and our communities, I don't think it's something that we talk about a lot, and that history is layered, right? We walk on streets where there are blood stains that are in the concrete that's been paved over, and we have to continue to tell that truth and unearth those realities and really sit inside of what current families, what present realities are caused and fueled by those past incidents. And so I thank you for this presentation. I thought it was really powerful and for taking the time to answer all of our questions. So thank you.
I also want to commend the audience and thank you again, David, for the powerful presentation. We're not creating new truth here. We're basically stating this is the past. A quote by George Santayana, those who don't learn from the past are doomed to repeat its mistakes. What I've heard repeatedly is that we cannot assume that there has not been a track record of people, institutions accumulating information about reparations. The work on the National African American Reparations Commission, the information about the Japanese Americans internments and the causes that led to that reparations. We need to know that history, and we need to bring that in here. And so every time I hear that, I'm empowered, knowing that we're not creating something, we're simply supporting all the work that's been ongoing for decades in this country. So I applaud all of you for bringing that history, for repeatedly bringing that history to us to keep us, of course, rooted in our overall mission. So thank you.
Okay, well, first of all, this has been very fruitful. And I want to just, well, first of all, let me say something about Callie House, who started the whole reparations movement right after the Civil War. The movement, there was movement to do, to try and get reparations even before Callie House, but she started a national movement and actually was persecuted by the government and wound up serving time right here in Missouri. Okay, so I just want to say, give her credit. And there's some powerful things that were being said. I really like what this brother said about reparations promote healing, not division. And I think, that might sound to a lot of people counterintuitive, but I think you're right. And you might have said that before, and I just didn't pick up on it, but it hit me when you said that before. And I think we need to say that more, because we do think a lot of people think it's divisive, and I agree with you. And I also want to thank Faith and Vivian for bringing out these universities. And thank you for that book, by the way, Faith, The Harm That Universities Do. When I talked about the whole housing issue of property, I wanted to make clear that, this was just one instance of some of the historic wrongs and some of the historic harms that have been visited upon black people. But, and I didn't talk about universities. And Mill Creek, yeah, St. Louis U benefited gloriously. They got all that land, not all of it, but they got a whole lot of it. And of course, WashU, the same thing. And I think sometimes we don't focus on what these universities do and their roles. So I want to thank all of you for bringing those issues up that we haven't really talked a lot about before. So thank you. And the young lady that said something about genealogy, I want to talk to you, okay?
William will give us information about our next public meeting, and then we'll be ready to wrap.
All right. As most of you know, we've tried to diversify the days in which we hold these meetings to make it more accessible to everyone. So this being a Saturday, our next meeting will be on a Wednesday, which is September 27th. And it will be at St. Louis Public Library, Carpenter Branch. The address is 3309 South Grand Boulevard. Does anyone need me to repeat that? Okay. One more time. St. Louis Public Library. Oh, sorry, I didn't do the time. Carpenter Branch, address 3309 South Grand Boulevard, and it'll be from 6 to 8. Sorry.
And then just as I'm an organizer, so we have things. If you have not signed the petition to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour statewide, see the team over here. If you are not registered to vote or need to update your registration, see the team over here. If you did not sign in, we won't call you to remind you about the next meeting. So please sign in before you leave so that we can call you. Action St. Louis will call you and remind you about the meeting that's happening in September. So many ways to plug in, many opportunities to stay involved. And we'll see you next month. That concludes our meeting. We hope you have a really phenomenal rest of your weekend.